Hi, this is Peter Godinez, your ambassador with KADY TV. We're here in the Port Hueneme Museum, and we're doing a version here of Good Morning Port Hueneme, and we have the good pleasure of having Mike Jacob, and I'm going to have him explain his title since it's so important. So why don't you tell us who you are?
I'm delighted to be here, and thanks for having me here this morning.
I love having you here.
So I'm the Vice President and General Counsel at Pacific Merchant Shipping Association, and we're a trade association that represents maritime interests up and down the West Coast, California, and the state of Washington. But I'm here because we're part of the committee that's looking into Measure M and opposed to that measure on the November ballot.
Well, I'm glad you explained it because I would have definitely loved that up, Mike. And there's only one Jacob here because we discussed they're usually Jacobs. So anyway, we're asking you to give us the facts in what Measure M is all about, and as more conversation goes on, the more complex this measure actually gets. So we're hoping you could shed some facts, some light to our viewing audience on the subject of Measure M.
Right. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. Measure M unfortunately isn't that simple. There's a lot of moving parts in it. We obviously are passionate about the impacts to the port and to the Navy base. We can talk about those in a little bit more detail, but just the broader scope of what the measure is it's a comprehensive update to the city's business tax. And the way that they've gone about doing that is they're expanding the categories that are being specified for being taxed at specific rates with respect to the Navy base and with respect to the port. They're consolidating and changing some of the other categories that have been on the books for a long time, but they're also raising rates across the board for those. So if you sat down and read the current ordinance and the changes that are proposed in Measure M, there's actually 29 different tax increases in there. That's on everything from real estate agents and brokers to fortune tellers, if there even are fortune tellers to be taxed.
I think there are.
They should have seen this coming.
Shoulda, coulda, woulda. Yeah.
But there's a CPI increase on everyone on an annual basis in here if they pay a fixed fee tax, and then there's the rate increases for folks who work at the port and federal contractors. All of those categories, and this is something that we should probably explain a little bit more too.
Please.
All of these categories are currently taxed. They might not be called out in the ordinance, but the city ordinance has a catch-all provision. So if you're not in the schedule on the table that says, here's your profession, here's what you pay every year to do business in the city, then you just pay a business receipts tax according to the schedule. And so that's how the existing businesses at the port pay. That's how existing businesses that are contractors at the base pay. But that's also how your dry cleaner pays or a restaurant pays. Because those things aren't called out as specific businesses in the tax table. So if you're a business person doing any type of business in Port Hueneme, you should have an expectation that you're going to pay the business license tax, and that's already the current rule. So Measure M isn't about that. It isn't about capturing new businesses. In our mind, it's just about what the tax rate's going to be.
Okay. And so there's so much emotion involved in this one, and maybe you can clarify some of the things that are real and some of the things that are not real in regards to fear, meaning that if there are no tax increases, that means there are going to be cuts in poor services, and can you dispel some of those?
Sure.
Or maybe they're real. I don't know, you tell us.
Yeah. Well, and to be frank, I mean, up until Measure M, we hadn't had to do a lot of work with the city of Port Hueneme as a trade association, as an industry. And the port itself, and obviously with its partners at the base, and with the city and in the general community, is doing a really good job. They have had some record years with respect to their tonnage. They have been promoting business really well. They have a lot of cars moving through here that A couple years ago they didn't have, and they really positioned themselves well to come out of the recession growing. And so that's a very good thing. And when the port does better, the city does better, and the entire county does better. And I think the folks of the city know that too, right? I mean, they have an appreciation for the fact that gross receipts taxes grow when gross receipts grow. But in the context of them looking at the impacts to the city right now, the city hasn't done that yet. So when we look at the city budget for this year, they have an entire year's worth of general fund balance in their reserve. And they only have a $150,000 projected deficit for this fiscal year. So they have the money to pay for what's going on now. And when you look at projected budgets that they've passed, they're not accounting for Measure M revenue. It would all be new revenue. So no one's worse off if you don't pass Measure M. We actually think the opposite is true. When you pass Measure M, then these rates go up. You will hurt businesses. And ultimately it will hurt the city and the county and schools and firefighters, all those folks that rely on tax revenue. And port tenants and Navy based businesses are paying about $28 million in local taxes a year. So I think just get back to the kind of the question at hand.
Yes.
We've got a situation now where the better thing to do would be to do what the city didn't do before they put Measure M on the ballot. What they said in their staff report, even putting it on, was, we don't know how much money this is going to raise, but let's do an audit and see what businesses are paying, which ones aren't paying, which ones are on the base, which ones are on the port that we feel aren't paying their fair share. Well, that's putting the cart before the horse. You should do that and try to do some enforcement before you go out to the voters and ask people to change the way your taxes are structured. And that's a fundamental disconnect. They can't tell you how much money the tax is going to raise. They can't tell you which businesses are going to pay and which ones aren't going to pay. And I know that they paraded out this trail of businesses that aren't paying. Measure M doesn't change any of the rules with respect to apportionment or enforcement or exemptions. So anyone that thinks that businesses aren't paying taxes, and that's what they keep saying, that they're not paying, I mean, that's just hard to believe. It's fundamentally hard to believe. And if someone isn't paying taxes they owe, then the city should have a dialogue with them about their tax liability and try to enforce it. And but Measure M doesn't change any of that. It doesn't change any of the exemptions in current law. It doesn't change the apportionment structure. By that, I mean, how much of your business would you assign to Port Wayne versus being in the city of Oxnard or something like that? And so there's a lot of questions there, and they just don't know the answer.
Now within the Measure M, definitely the it's written, but some of the spirit of the law says that to collaborate you have to be willing to. Is that a rumor that there is an unwillingness to converse, to discuss, and that type of stuff? And
Yeah,
is that going on?
I think one of the first things that was said to us both by the port and by the city when we had some early conversations was both of them viewed Measure M as not having anything to do with that dispute.
Okay.
So I think I'd take both of those parties at face value. Is there friction there between the port and the city? Do they have issues to resolve? Yeah, they do. But frankly, that doesn't have anything to do with the tax liability of individual businesses under Measure M. They could resolve all of those things tomorrow, and the Measure M questions would still be out there. And so, did the city reach out and talk to port tenants and customers and businesses or the port itself about Measure M? No, I mean, they only published the staff report and the proposed ordinance the Friday before they adopted it on Monday. So they didn't have a process there. And they didn't have the same process with federal contractors on base. And if those are the people that the city has problems with, they should have talked to us. But more importantly, they also didn't talk to the community. They didn't talk to voters. So now you've got this issue, and I think everybody rightly, when we talk to them, is confused. You guys are doing this great service by having people come in and talk to you to explain the issues. You saw the forum last night. There was a lot of just disagreement on what the facts are, right? That's a byproduct of not having a thorough vetting of these issues and getting to a conclusion where, we can disagree about our opinions of what's going to happen or the impact of something. But when we're debating tax policy, we should never be debating what the facts are.
Right.
But that's where we're at. And so that discussion never happened before Measure M went on. And that's a problem. I think a lot of this probably would have been resolved if they had started earlier, or if they knew they wanted to do it, start that dialogue with people and really get to the heart of the matter. But we're still having disagreements over what the existing law says.
Yeah.
And that's a problem that city residents in Port Hueneme should know about too. If the city council actually believes that there are a whole swath of businesses that we think are actually currently liable, and so do they because they're paying, and the city council is going out there and saying, oh man, we need to update our code because they don't need to pay taxes, and something's wrong. So I think fundamentally that means that they're right. They need to update their code. But that doesn't mean an update is the same thing as raising rates for a whole bunch of people.
It's amazing. So I think what you're saying is somebody, if the citizens of Port Hueneme were forced to read Measure M 10 times, study it, nobody would always be on the same page. There'd still be opportunity for debate, misinterpretation, conversation, that type of thing.
If you just read Measure M, I think that's what happens, right? Because Measure M doesn't tell the whole story. If you just read the ballot question, it doesn't say anything about the tax increases in any substantive way or how it impacts anybody. It just says, do you want to cut taxes for home-based businesses and raise taxes on some other people to pay for things? Then if you actually went to the ballot and you looked at the proposed ordinance, if you don't read it side by side with the existing law, you can't tell what's being changed. You just know what's new. So we put on our website on votenoonm.com, we put a read it for yourself tab up there. We put the proposed ordinance in Measure M. We put the current tax ordinance up there and a summary of the side by side of what's changed. And that's where we discovered there were 29 different tax increases in there, not just on us. I mean, obviously the biggest impacts are on the port and Navy contractors, and the ripple effect of that is, that's where you get all the folks that are opposed to it, from firefighters to teachers, because they know that that's real. But there's lots of small changes that people should be looking at too, and some of them are kind of quirky. So there's currently a ban in Port Hueneme on people coming door to door doing door-to-door sales after 6 p.m. That gets deleted in Measure M. So there's no more prohibition on going door to door. There's a 250% increase on real estate agents for doing business in the city, but there's an 83% cut for telephone solicitors. I mean, it's very kind of haphazard in our opinion. It doesn't seem to be a real rhyme or reason to why some things get increased, some things stay the same, and some things get cut. And so I think that's kind of what should be happening at a city before they go to their citizens and say, we'd like to do this thing in a way that's less controversial. So, in some respects, I'm not surprised by the controversy, because that's what happens when you kind of just spring stuff on folks. And I don't think that people should be surprised by the intensity of opposition either, because when a city is home to some really big economic engines like the Navy base and like the port, there are a lot of people that have built their lives around the success of those institutions. And that includes the entire community. So there's only so much tinkering around the edges you could do, right, without talking to people and having that broad-based discussion first before you actually run into some honest to goodness, just flat out issues that need to be dealt with.
Mike, I wish I'd had Professor Z when I was at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I would have been a lot smarter.
Thanks for the time.
You did a great
Thank
job
you.
of explaining. I hope, audience, that you are more educated, more informed on Measure M. Peter Godinez from Ambassador KEY TV. Until next time.